My girlfriend with borderline and anxiety acts like a toddler, and I'm the one exhausted at 42. You don't take a no as an answer and Little Prince just wants others to do everything for him. I'm considering giving up on a relationship that feels like an uphill battle. Can it really change? Firstly, I apologize. This may very well turn into an incoherent rant as my emotions are still quite raw. I have lived with my girlfriend for almost 4 years now. She does not have a job. She struggles with issues such as borderline personality disorder, depression, and social anxiety, which make it very challenging for her to maintain steady employment. In principle, the agreement is that instead, she is responsible for taking care of the household, including cleaning, cooking, and other tasks, while I work to earn all the income. In reality, she has not properly cleaned the apartment in years, and her cooking averages only about 30% of the time, leaving many other responsibilities to fall on my shoulders. She frequently expresses eagerness with statements like, "I should clean this up," and I genuinely believe she wants to, at least on some level. However, 3 years later, we are still left with a pile of unorganized trash and junk. Occasionally, she makes optimistic promises such as, "I can make you lunch for work every day," but the success rate for this is around 20% in reality. Certainly, I could pressure her and remind her more about these chores or insist on them every day, but I truly dislike doing that. Especially because whenever I attempt to gently discuss such topics, rather than engaging in a productive conversation, it tends to sour her mood for the remainder of the day, or she may even become upset. So regardless, it is not something I want to deal with. We live in Japan and neither of us is a native speaker. However, I am more fluent, so I often take time off work to accompany her to various appointments, such as dental, medical, immigration, or nearly anything else. It is not only due to language barriers, but also because of her social anxiety, and I sincerely want to assist her. I also end up managing all the paperwork and bills for everything. I do not mind taking care of her if she actually fulfilled the responsibilities she promised to undertake. In a sense, it is not the end of the world to care for her, even if her dependency can sometimes feel a bit unhealthy. However, I struggle with my own motivation issues to the extent that I can barely care for myself, so the most challenging aspect occurs when she behaves like a difficult child, which significantly increases the amount of energy I need to expend to manage her. For example, a few days ago, at her request, I took her to a nearby dermatologist. I wanted to arrive there as soon as they opened so I could get to work on time. I was unsure how long it might take, but I was aware of the risk of cutting it too close. I woke her up 20 minutes before we were supposed to be there, and her first words were in a harsh tone, "Why are you waking me up 20 minutes before we need to be somewhere that takes 3 minutes to walk to?" In the end, she ended up being 7 minutes late. She has never apologized for either of those things and becomes irritated if I try to hurry her. I also have to accompany her to the dentist. I do not think I even need to be there, but I doubt she would go on her own. The reason I am so insistent about her going is that she neglects her dental health. She had to have one decayed tooth extracted because she refuses to brush her teeth at all. She constantly claims that she simply forgets, but I have reminded her countless times. In fact, nearly every day I tell her, "Okay, I am going to go brush my teeth." However, today was the most recent breaking point. We were supposed to see a psychiatrist. We go to the same clinic at the same time, so it was not just me dedicating my time to her care. I am going for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and she is going for depression, anxiety, and related issues. In the morning, she experienced nausea and had not slept well. Many times, I essentially have to fight with her to get her to attend any appointment. Instead of discussing matters on previous days when we have agreed on the appointments, and I usually remind her multiple times about them, the struggle always arises 5 minutes before we need to leave while both of us are still groggy and feeling the pressure of time. I do not believe that is important. I really do not want to go. I am not feeling well. Consequently, even when it is a critical medical meeting, I have to push her hard to the point that it turns into an argument. Usually, I just have to concede and then apologize to the doctors and reschedule a new appointment. Even when I manage to get her to go, we have been late many times due to this pattern. So okay, she was feeling unwell, fine, that happens. However, for her it occurs frequently for a variety of reasons. In particular, with the psychiatrist, they know us, so I have managed everything for her in the past. I went in alone, explained the situation to the doctor, provided some white lies about why she could not attend, and he continued her medication and gave me the prescription. This time, however, the doctor wanted to lower her dosage but insisted on having her consent. I tried reaching her multiple times by phone, but she did not pick up. This has been a source of frustration for me for a while because I have attempted to contact her many times without success. It becomes extremely frustrating. There have been numerous instances where I do not even know her whereabouts, which causes me concern, and she simply will not respond to my calls or messages for hours. For instance, just recently, I was visiting a remote supermarket on my way home from work, which again should be her responsibility, but I was trying to be helpful and make things easier for her. and I was attempting to call her to find out what we had in the refrigerator so I would not buy unnecessary extra items. Yet again, I received no response. This is a recurring pattern. 80% of the time I call her, I cannot reach her, even in emergencies, despite my repeated calls on her phone or multiple messaging platforms. As a side note, often I find it easier to handle some of her responsibilities myself, because if I even gently encourage her to take care of them, she reacts very negatively and becomes impossible to communicate with. Now it would be somewhat understandable if her lack of response was merely an honest mistake. Perhaps she was in the bathroom and could not hear the phone ringing or something similar. However, this continues to happen, and after the supermarket incident, I wanted to definitively figure out why it was so difficult to reach her. It appears that she has silenced all her ringtones and does not employ vibrations. I spoke to her and asked if I could adjust the phone settings so at least my ringtone would come through. I have told her many times how important it is for me to be able to contact her in case of an emergency and asked her to address this, but she simply dismissed it. Thus, I only call her when it is genuinely necessary to capture her immediate attention, which is infrequent. Ironically, she does the same to me far more frequently at work. For example, yesterday she called to ask me a random math question. Therefore, I customized a ringtone solely for my calls. However, later she expressed dissatisfaction with this change because I was messing with her phone, despite having requested her permission beforehand, and we ended up in a minor argument. Initially, she accused me of shouting at her and claimed I grabbed her phone without permission, but she later retracted those accusations, only to bring them up again. There are numerous occasions when her version of events is not only extreme but also internally inconsistent. Fast forward to the discussion concerning the calls related to the doctor's appointment. After explaining the situation, I texted her to clarify the reason for my calls and asked, "Did we not set up the ringtone for you or did you not wake up to it?" She simply responded, "I do not know." It turned out that after I customized the ringtone last time, she had quietly turned it off and then lied about it. When I spoke to her face-to-face about it, her defense was, "You do not accept no as an answer, so I just agreed with you and later turned it off." I believe I would accept no as an answer, but I would prefer to discuss the matter, especially since her sole reason for not wanting a ringtone for me is that she does not want her phone to make noises. As a side note, she has an alarm that rings every day which she consistently forgets, reminding her of only one single task on Wednesday. However, when I mentioned that, her defense was, "Okay, I will turn off the alarm, problem solved." I pointed out that this reasoning is illogical if she has been comfortable with her phone producing surprise sounds daily, while I call her perhaps once every 2 months. Her response was literally, "Oh yes, because it does not make sense to you, I have to agree with everything you say. I am not obligated to answer you," followed by, "Oh, the little prince just wants others to do everything he tells them to." This is someone who consistently conveys that if I do something she perceives as wrong, my actual intentions do not matter. Only how she feels about it is significant. There is some truth to this to an extent, but we are discussing situations in which I have only the best intentions, and I am quite confident that 99% of people would agree. The issue is that this principle only applies in one direction. When I inadvertently do something wrong, she expects an apology. In fact, she believes that an apology is insufficient, and when I remind her of that perspective and express my discomfort with her actions, either I deserve it or her excuses are often contradictory and nonsensical or reduced to, "Well, I do not want to, you cannot force me." I am not perfect, but I genuinely make an effort to address issues calmly and seek mutually agreeable solutions that extend beyond mere, "I do not want to." Of course, for the sake of brevity, I am omitting the positive aspects of the relationship and presenting only my perspective. For instance, her childlike demeanor can come with an adorable sense of wonder and excitement, while her strong feelings have both positive and negative attributes. Naturally, without delving into too much detail, there is a risk that I may be portraying myself as a saint, but I can respond to inquiries in greater depth and clarify the areas where I believe I have erred. Even if these are merely small issues on their own, they feel like they are accumulating, so I attempted to provide some context for why I am experiencing these feelings. There is certainly much more to consider as well. I apologize if this has turned out to be quite lengthy. Honestly, I do not have high hopes that anyone will respond. We have also tried couples therapy, and she has been seeing both a psychiatrist and a therapist. Even though some of the initial tensions have subsided, it feels as though the underlying problems have largely remained unchanged. Things have not significantly improved for a couple of years. We have had numerous serious discussions and near breakups, and after those conversations, she typically begins to behave positively for a time. She may even concede that she was in the wrong and ask for forgiveness, only to revert to her old habits a few weeks or months later, all while claiming that I always force her to apologize and concur with me. I simply do not want to endure the same pattern repeating, but I am unsure what else to do to salvage the situation. I am also concerned that if I talk to her about all this, it will become the fifth or sixth similar serious conversation where I have always given her the benefit of the doubt and decided to grant her another chance, hoping for improvement. At this point, I am genuinely contemplating giving up on her. Given my own issues, as I mentioned earlier, I feel as though I can barely take care of myself, so it is incredibly challenging to support someone who takes none of her few responsibilities seriously, cannot care for herself, and makes my efforts to assist her immensely taxing. She is supposed to be taking care of me and the household as well, but she ends up being a significant drain on my energy, and at present, it may be more than I can manage. Story 2. At 20, I'm haunted by my family's dark past. My grandmother fled abuse, my father was a gangbanger, and I faced unimaginable trauma as a child. I can't bury what makes me me, I realized. Now I fight for my siblings, my only reason to keep going. Will I ever break free? I am sharing my life story here. It has been 20 years so far. I am a recently turned 20-year-old male. Before I allow you to read this, I want to acknowledge that I am familiar with pain. I do not intend to sound dramatic or cringeworthy, it is simply a reality. I should issue a trigger warning here as the content may be distressing. There are implications of sexual assault, violence, and suicide. I was born to two teenagers who bonded over trauma, resulting in me and the four siblings who would follow. Initially, I thought to start from my beginnings, but I feel it is necessary to go back a bit further to provide a complete picture. On my mother's side, my grandmother was born into a family heavily tied to the Ku Klux Klan. Growing up, the women were utilized for cleaning, cooking, and sex. At least, that is what she has told me. My grandmother grew up in that environment and chose to run away at a very young age, successfully escaping. She was a child and naive, as she described herself. While on the run, she was approached by a man asking what she was doing and why she was alone. Ultimately, my grandmother found herself in a similar situation until she turned 19. It was at that point that she escaped by throwing herself out of a 3-story window, which resulted in her having two sons whom she raised as her own, my uncles. Later, she met my grandfather at a strip club and had my mother and aunt. Given all that has happened, my grandmother promised herself that history would not repeat itself in any way. Consequently, she became extremely overprotective and did not want her daughters to engage in anything that could attract attention or provoke desire. One can understand her perspective based on her experiences with men. All of them seemed the same. Why give someone the benefit of the doubt and risk the safety of her daughters? That was her mindset, a justified, albeit controlling, viewpoint. As a result, my mother rebelled and ran away. On my father's side, my grandmother struggled with heavy drug use and was involved with my grandfather, who, from what I have heard, was the type to deal drugs and run a prostitution operation. He was rarely around, and when he was, it was for his own selfish desires. My grandmother ended up having 13 children, including my father, most of whom are either deceased or incarcerated due to gang-related violence and drug dealings. Given this background, my father did what any other fatherless black child would do in that environment. As they say, it takes a village to raise him. My parents met in a shelter on the beach, clicked, and quickly became inseparable. After causing some trouble and hanging around, it did not take long for me to enter the picture. I was born, and 2 years later my sister was born. Life was rocky from then on. I will break down the rest by year. At around 3 to 4 years old, my father was still involved in gang-related activities and would often be gone for long stretches of time. My mother had to raise both me and my sister on her own. Fortunately, I was a relatively easy child, which she considered a blessing. My mother worked multiple jobs and even taught me, as a toddler, how to care for my 1-year-old sister. I learned how to change diapers when necessary and prepare baby food as needed. Activities of that nature continued for several months, closer to a year. After feeling overworked and exhausted, my mother chose to pursue child support from my father. When she did, he retaliated by reporting her for child neglect and took custody of us. From approximately 4.5 to 5.5 years old, my sister and I were in my father's care. We lived in a hotel and were taken care of by one of his female friends, a prostitute he would exploit. In retrospect, that was far from ideal. I cannot deny that this woman loved my father in her own twisted way and did anything for him. When we were brought there, we represented his children with another woman and we suffered for it. I experienced abuse in every manner, physically, mentally, and sexually, at her hands and others. This continued for that year. I remember staring at the wall with my hands raised for hours at a time. I was beaten if I moved or if I needed to use the bathroom, and I was not allowed to go. I recall being hidden under the bed while she worked. There was one instance earlier on when I needed to use the restroom. I crawled out and tried to go, knowing that if I wet myself, I would be beat. As I walked to the restroom, I heard my name called and froze. I turned around to see four men sharing her. I was beaten and later, used. Eventually, I do not remember how, but at some point we ended up back in my mother's care. The pain is ever present, as one does not forget what they have felt. It is a vivid memory that can be relived. Back then, I did not understand the full extent of what everything meant or what I had endured. But now, that experience has affected me in ways I cannot even begin to explain. I do, however, remember my father apologizing profusely and crying. I remember hearing about how he beat that woman. While I do not believe in forgiveness, I cannot deny it is not fair to carry that burden. She was another broken soul, manipulated into caring to that extent, expressing twisted devotion out of jealousy. I acknowledge that, and she too was simply used. I feel sorry for her despite the hatred I hold. My mother eventually gained visitation rights, but bruises appeared on us that could not be explained. This led to another argument between my parents, as my father did not know how we had gotten them. My mother dressed us to conceal the marks. Fast forward a bit and we were back in my mother's care. My father and my mother were still on and off, and they had 3 more children, bringing our total to 5. We have 2 sisters and 2 brothers. Yet amidst the early years of our broken home, my mind wandered. I used to be curious about the world, fixating on it intensely until that interest faded. My parents introduced us to religion, and I began to wonder how everything outside of the holy texts, such as the Bible, the Torah, and others connected to science and the world. My grandfather on my mother's side never denied me answers and fueled my curiosity. I eventually came to view science as merely an attempt to understand a set of imposed instructions. A little further into grade school, my interest shifted toward people and how they functioned. However, one thing stood out to me the most in school: the underlying lust and interest in it. Having been exposed to that, I could see the looks, the body language, and the buildup. Even among my peers, other kids would discuss it in small circles. It was then that I sought to understand it, the lust, and I would recall what had happened to me. I began asking why. Why did people behave that way? Why was it everywhere? Why was it worthy of such a deep fixation? I sought to integrate myself into active groups of kids. I remember starting with a kiss. I could see the anticipation in their eyes. As the kiss grew deeper, so did their eagerness. I recognized how wrong it felt and chose not to go further, backing out of it all. I did not like it, but I never ceased observing people. How they interacted, the dynamics at play, the desires they fixated on, and how shallow some individuals could be. As I aged, I grew increasingly isolated and heavily antisocial. I would pretend and wear a mask when interacting with others, conforming to their expectations for the mutual benefit of both parties. However, I could never take it further. After a while, once I felt I had gained their trust, I became bored. I never chose to exploit that opportunity. I could not break people that way. In late middle school and high school, I stopped wearing the mask and stopped pretending. However, I could see others doing what I had done, except they crossed that line, reducing it to a game. I thought maybe it was just my environment, maybe just the people surrounding me. I saw boys who would use others, cross that line, and discard them. I despised that behavior because it became alarmingly prevalent. The glorification of sex was rampant, with teenage curiosity leading to all the kissing and telling. I detested the aftermath, the attitudes surrounding it. Among male circles, it became like a game, a form of currency for the ego, a selfish indulgence, a mere activity rather than a genuine experience. The connection was lost. I frequently replayed that moment in my mind when I was just a body being exploited, constant triggers. I stepped back and managed to graduate toward the end of my sophomore year. I dabbled in college here and there, but I did not give much thought to it since I was unsure of what I wanted to pursue. I worked various jobs but ultimately found myself unable to function socially. I ceased attempting to make friends among males. 70% of the conversations revolved around sex, while the other 30% focused on hobbies, work, or school. In my eyes, they were not worth connecting with. I found it equally difficult to forge friendships with females. More often than not, I found myself playing the role of a therapist, helping them deal with the struggles they had faced. I would dance with their pain and try to present it in a new light, assisting them in moving beyond obsession or merely seeking physical connections. After all the fixing, I was left behind, either because I became associated with their past pain or because they seldom fell for the solution. Amidst it all, I found myself longing for my own connection, devotion to simply existing. But I realized I had messed myself up. I had never lived a normal life, so I struggled to relate to most people. I had not traveled, and I could not discuss different types of coffee or engage in small talk typically associated with a normal or good upbringing. I did not understand that language. I only knew pain, how to identify it, use it as motivation to keep myself grounded, and be comfortable with it. I missed the opportunity to develop those connections high school, college. I regret not having built anything substantial. Now it feels like a mere exchange, what I offer stability, fun, and whatever else someone might seek. That seems fair, but I am broken and lost. I cannot simply bury what has shaped my identity. Honestly, despite that aching desire to not feel alone, a need I wish I did not have, I cannot take anyone under my wing if I have no real idea what I want to do with my life. And although at times I may wish for a fairy tale, it is increasingly clear to me that we are all to some extent living in one. No one is doing the saving if we are all simply waiting to be saved, despite the above reflections. While I begrudgingly drown in envy and live through others vicariously, I keep moving forward. Honestly, I would have ended my life long ago if I did not have the siblings I went on to raise looking up to me as their big brother. They are all parts of me. My two brothers mirror me in ways that make it impossible for me to leave. I move heavily and look intense, or so I am told. One of my little brothers is mirroring my style, I guess. Thankfully, those two have been spared from that pain. My sisters and I share the same suffering. My progress forward also encourages them to strive for the same. My parents and my family mean too much to me to simply leave and die. I cannot subject them to that. Therefore, I continue to move forward and bury the pain, even though I have grown to hate everything and desire almost nothing. I needed to get this off my chest. I am in the army now, hoping it could provide me with purpose, a commitment to something greater than myself, but it has not proven to be worthy of that. I have deluded dreams that still linger, my mind cycles through thoughts and unravels in the shadows. I needed to release this, and yes, it may be messy. It is not organized as I initially intended, but who really cares now? If you made it through all of this, thank you for sharing your time with me. Story 3. At 13, I was kidnapped by my first friend Ashley, who kept saying, "You're so cute like this." I woke up bruised, trapped with her filming me, and the last thing I remember is her whispering, "Behave, or else." How did I escape this nightmare? Warning, all details are true except names. Warning, this post discusses violence, sexual assault, and animal abuse. I want to remain anonymous, and this is my first post, so please be compassionate. This is somewhat of a rant because I need to express this experience. I will start from the beginning so that it makes sense. When I was 13, I attended an online private Christian school due to being bullied in my previous schools. As I was new to this institution, another girl, whom I will refer to as Ashley, was also new. She was 15. She and I quickly became close friends, partly because we had much in common and I was eager for companionship. It is worth noting that she was my first and closest friend up to that point, so I certainly overlooked numerous red flags, one of which was how much we shared in common. As our friendship developed, we realized that she lived relatively near me, about a 3-hour drive from my house. One day she invited me to visit and I accepted. When I first stepped out of the car and saw her fully for the first time, I could instantly sense her narcissistic nature. Everything about her screamed narcissism. I knew at that moment that I should just go home and avoid her. However, I didn't want to believe that someone I cared about could be so narcissistic, so I decided to give her a chance. That was my first mistake. The sleepover was not particularly bad, but it still made me hesitant to visit again. In fact, I rushed out and forgot a few items. Some of the reasons I felt the urge to leave included the fact that I stayed for 2 nights and woke up each day to her watching me. She exhibited violence towards her cat and other animals. Additionally, her parents were just off. The remainder of the time was relatively normal until the drive home. Her mother drove me home, but Ashley joined us to say goodbye at my house. During the car ride, she kept touching my neck, displaying an odd, almost obsessive fixation on it throughout the journey. When we arrived, I showed her my room and left her alone in it while I went to the bathroom. However, when I returned, I found that she was tampering with my stuffed animals. I thought everything was fine, and eventually she left, making it seem like everything was okay. A few weeks later, while reorganizing my stuffed animals, I discovered a camera. Being the naive child I was, I destroyed it out of sheer terror upon realizing she had placed it there. I recognized it as hers because it had her name on it. Consequently, I decided to slowly distance myself from her, and eventually things began to feel normal again. That was until she texted me asking me to come over. I declined, and she began to pressure and threaten me. She manipulated me into visiting by reminding me of the items I had forgotten, and her threats and pressure overwhelmed me. Warning, the violence and sexual assault start here. I did not tell my parents what was truly happening at that time for various reasons. I simply informed them that I was going to a friend's house for a day and that I would text them. Her father picked me up, and Ashley was already in the car, smiling widely, acting overly cheerful. She continually touched my neck during the ride as if it were some sort of joke to her. Upon arrival, I slipped in the mud and got dirty. She immediately offered to eagerly to prepare the shower for me. I did not think much of it. Once she had finished setting it up, I went in, took off my clothes, and got in the shower. When I finished and stepped out, I noticed a small red light, and then it dawned on me that it was a camera recording me. I then heard muffled, heavy breathing. My heart stopped. I turned and saw her eye peeking through the crack in the door. I froze in fear. My hands trembled as I turned away, quickly got dressed, then unlocked and slowly opened the door. She was standing at the end of the hallway, smiling. "I made tea," she said sweetly. I sat down at the table where the tea was. She sat across from me. I dared not look her in the eye. After a tense silence, she said a single word. "Drink." I drank. She smiled wider. I glanced up, our eyes met, and hers were terrifying, hollow, wide, and empty. Suddenly, my head became heavy. Everything began to spin. I remember her laugh, high-pitched and twisted, echoing in my ears as I lost consciousness. The last sensation I experienced was her carrying me somewhere. When I regained consciousness, I was naked. I felt pain everywhere. The time was likely around midnight, just like that day one of hell began. I looked around, confused and in pain. There was no sign of anyone. I stumbled to the bathroom, locked the door, relieved myself, and then looked in the mirror. My body was covered in bruises. As I examined my reflection, I heard it again, muffled breathing. I held my breath and froze. The sound did not cease. Slowly, I turned toward the door and saw her eye again, watching me through the crack. I looked away, trembling. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "I know you're in there." Silence fell. She grew impatient and banged on the door several times before forcibly opening it. I fell backward, crawling against the wall. She grabbed me by the hair and dragged me out of the bathroom, back into the room where I had awakened. There, she beat me over and over until I could barely move. When she finally stopped, she pulled me up, kissed me on the lips, and whispered, "You're so cute like this." Then she tossed me aside and locked the door behind her as she departed. I passed out again. The next time I woke up, sunlight streamed into my eyes. I heard voices, hers and a male voice, arguing outside the door. I panicked and rushed to the window, trying to open it, desperate to escape. She entered, acting as if nothing had happened. "Hey, you're awake," she said, as if we were just friends. I stared at her in horror. She turned to the guy and said, "See, I told you she was beautiful." He shrugged and replied, "Yeah, I guess." Then she approached and whispered in my ear, "Behave, or else." I froze. The guy stepped forward and began kissing me, his hands roaming my body. I tried to push him away, but then she attacked me again. I screamed in anguish as she struck me repeatedly until I could no longer resist. Then he returned, he undressed me, he raped me. I felt everything every second until my body simply went numb. When he was done, he got up and she licked his fluids off me. Then they kissed over my broken body and had sex right beside me. Time seemed to stand still. Eventually, they left me alone. I curled up in the corner and wept myself to sleep. That marked the beginning of day 2. I woke up to country music and Ice Age movies playing. I was already dressed, but I checked the door. It was locked. I waited for the opportunity to run to her parents. I told them everything. They did not believe me. They refused to take me home or even permit me to call my mother. When I turned around, Ashley was there, smiling that same twisted smile. She led me back to the basement and tied me up once more. After a while, she returned and beat me again. Grabbing my head by the hair, she slammed it into the wall repeatedly until I passed out. I woke up to complete darkness. She was not there. I put on a shirt and underwear and fled. I found the sliding door to the basement, slipped out, and ran straight to the barn to hide. The smell hit me first, death. Inside, there were dismembered animals, deer, cats, rabbits, birds, squirrels, a turtle, even a dog. They all shared one horrifying trait: their eyes were missing. I gagged, and then I heard the rattle of a shotgun. "Do you want to become like them?" she asked. The cold metal pressed against my back. I panicked and somehow managed to wrest the gun away from her. I fled into the woods. I ran for what felt like hours. All I could hear was my own breathing and the heavy thuds of my feet until I tripped. I looked up and was met with the butt of a gun smashing into my skull. Everything went black. When I awoke, I had no idea what day it was. He was raping me again. When he finished, she touched me all over. I zoned out. It felt endless. Later, they left. I spotted her phone and grabbed it. It was unlocked. It was filled with photos of me naked and unconscious. She had been texting my mother, pretending to be me. I felt a cold blade press against my throat. "Drop it," she commanded. I hesitated. I began to call 911, but she took the blade and slashed my chest open, enough to terrify me, but not enough to kill me. "Drop it," she repeated, so I complied. She picked up the phone, moved the blade from my chest to my neck, and licked the blood off. "Good girl," she whispered. She said that since I was being good, she would feed me. She left and returned with a Subway sandwich and sweet tea. It was the first real food I had eaten in 3 days. I gobbled it down and then passed out, drugged again. Day 4. I woke up to her beside me, petting my hair. "Do you know what my favorite weapon is?" she inquired. A flathead screwdriver, it's perfect for plucking eyes. You know what will happen to you if you tell anyone, right? Then she began to sit on top of me, pressing the cold metal of the flathead screwdriver against my eye. She pressed harder and harder, then suddenly let up, laughing as if it were the funniest thing in the world. I cannot remember what happened after that. Eventually, my mother came and got me. She saw that I was in terrible shape and took me to the hospital. She did not discover what truly happened until 2 years later.